Before the Iron Chancellor emerged, a man whose name made European capitals tremble, he was simply Otto. And Otto was a catastrophe. He was a walking hurricane, an untamed force of nature confined within the body of a tall, strong Prussian Junker aristocrat. His youth was not a prelude to great achievements, but a series of scandals, duels, drunken brawls, and gambling debts. They called him the Mad Junker, a nickname he fully earned and wore with the pride of a battle scar. He was born on April 1st, 1815, the year Napoleon, the great shaker of Europe, suffered his final defeat at Waterloo. It was as if history itself, closing one turbulent chapter, had cleared the stage for a new major player. His origins embodied the dualism that would tear at him his entire life. His father, Ferdinand von Bismarck, was a typical representative of the Prussian landed gentry, a conservative, grounded man whose interests rarely extended beyond hunting, harvests, and the pedigree of his horses. But his mother, Wilhelmina, came from a family of scholars and high-ranking civil servants. She was an ambitious, educated, cold, and demanding woman who spoke several languages. It was she, not his father, who saw the spark of genius in her son and decided to mold him into a brilliant diplomat. Otto hated this destiny forced upon him. He despised academics, considering them the domain of the weak. He scorned civil servants, whom he called scribes and pen pushers. His entire rebellious nature rose up against his mother's plan. He wanted to live loudly, fiercely, with abandon. At the University of Göttingen, where he was sent to study law, he plunged headfirst into the wild freedom of student life. Instead of lectures, he frequented taverns. Instead of studying laws, he mastered the art of fencing. He participated in more than 25 duels, and the scar on his cheek from one of them became a lifelong source of pride, a visible sign of his masculinity. He became famous for keeping a huge Great Dane, which he dressed in the colors of his student fraternity, and for his ability to drink an unimaginable amount of beer mixed with champagne. His intellect was as sharp as a razor, but he used it not for his studies, but for writing caustic epigrams and wriggling out of endless trouble with the university authorities. After formally completing his studies, he yielded to his mother's will and entered the civil service. It was hell. The necessity of sitting from 9 to 5 in a stuffy office, obeying foolish superiors, and shuffling endless papers drove him mad. He later wrote, "My pride rebels at the thought of having to obey the orders of others." After a year of misery, he fled. He escaped to his ancestral estate of Kniephof in Pomerania to become an ordinary farmer. It seemed to be the end of all ambition. The Mad Junker had become the crazed Junker. He managed the estate, but in his own unique style. He would gallop for hours across the fields, firing his guns into the air, shock his neighbors by releasing a fox in their drawing room, or host wild, all-night drinking parties with his army friends. Yet at the same time, he read voraciously. Shakespeare, Byron, Spinoza, Hegel. He devoured the most complex philosophical and historical works, trying to find answers to the questions that tormented him. He was a volcano that had not yet found its time to erupt, and all his untamed energy was spent in vain, burning him from within during bouts of melancholy he called his black blood. It was at this moment, at the very depth of his despair, that love saved him. He met Johanna von Puttkamer, a quiet, deeply religious young woman from a pious, noble family. Her parents were horrified at the prospect of giving their daughter to this scandalous atheist. But Bismarck, truly in love for the first time, showed unprecedented persistence. He wrote Johanna's father one of the most astonishing letters in history, a confession in which he described with ruthless honesty all his sins, his lack of faith, and his dissolute life. But he also wrote that his love for this woman had changed him, forcing him for the first time to think about God and the meaning of life. He confessed, and he did not lie. Johanna became his anchor, his safe harbor. She did not understand his political intrigues, but she gave him what he never had: a home, peace, and unconditional faith in him. This love did not tame his volcano, but it channeled its energy in a single direction. The wild Junker was ready to become a politician. His chance came in 1847 when he was elected to the Prussian Landtag, the United Parliament. He immediately shocked everyone. In an era when all of Europe was captivated by liberal ideas, freedom, and constitutions, Bismarck took the stage as a fiery, uncompromising monarchist, a defender of the divine right of kings. His very first speech, in which he attacked the liberals with contempt and sarcasm, caused an uproar. He was booed and shouted down. He calmly waited for the noise to subside, then continued with icy composure, pulling a newspaper from his pocket and beginning to read it demonstratively. On that day, Germany first saw the Bismarck the world would later know. A man who went against the current, unafraid of being hated, and absolutely certain of his own righteousness. A year later, revolution erupted. The plant of 1848 swept across Europe. Crowds demanded constitutions, and barricades rose even on the streets of Berlin. King Frederick William IV was frightened and made concessions, even riding through the city wearing a revolutionary armband. Bismarck was furious. He saw this as cowardice and betrayal. He immediately shaved his beard so as not to be mistaken for a revolutionary and rushed to Potsdam. He begged the king to let him bring his loyal peasants, arm them, and drown the revolution in blood. The king, shocked by such radicalism, refused. But he noticed and remembered this fierce Junker, ready to die for the monarchy. The revolution failed. The liberals proved incapable of reaching an agreement and holding on to power. The pendulum swung back, and the king remembered Bismarck. He was not yet ready to entrust him with a ministry. The man was too radical, too dangerous. But he found the perfect place for him, a way to remove him from Berlin while still using his talents. He sent him as an envoy to Frankfurt, to the Diet of the German Confederation, an amorphous collection of dozens of German states dominated by the Austrian Empire. Bismarck arrived in Frankfurt and saw the full humiliation of Prussia's position. The Austrians acted like masters, while the Prussians and representatives of other small states were treated like poor relations. He decided to change that. His first move was the famous cigar incident. At the Diet's sessions, only the Austrian representative was permitted to smoke. It was a small but demeaning privilege. One day during a meeting, Bismarck, to everyone's astonishment, took a cigar from his pocket, walked up to the Austrian, and unceremoniously asked for a light. The Austrian was taken aback, but was forced to comply. The next day, everyone was smoking. It was a minor detail, but it was a signal. Prussia would no longer be second fiddle. In Frankfurt, and later as ambassador in St. Petersburg and Paris, Bismarck spent 8 years. These were the years of his true education. He studied his future enemies. He realized that France under Napoleon III was vain but weak. He understood that Russia must be kept as a friend to avoid a stab in the back, and he learned the Russian language. And he became firmly convinced of his main idea. The path to German unification lay through blood. The main obstacle on this path was Austria. For Germany to become united, Austria had to be expelled from it, by force. He did not yet know how he would do it, but he had already begun to arrange the pieces on the board, and he was waiting for his moment. Bismarck's hour came in 1862, striking amidst a profound constitutional crisis. Prussia was on the brink of civil war, or a military coup. The new king, Wilhelm I, was a man of honor and duty, a true soldier, but he lacked political flexibility and resolve. He was locked in a mortal struggle with the Landtag, the Prussian parliament, where liberals held the majority. The stumbling block was military reform. The king and his generals, primarily Minister of War Albrecht von Roon, wanted to create a large, modern, and powerful army by increasing the term of service and the number of troops. For them, it was a matter of Prussia's survival in a hostile world. The liberal majority in Parliament, however, saw it as an attempt to strengthen the absolute power of the monarch and create an instrument for suppressing freedoms. They refused to approve the budget, paralyzing the state. The conflict reached a stalemate. The king, driven to despair and unwilling to violate the Constitution, had already drafted his abdication. The entire conservative elite of Prussia was in a panic. It was then that von Roon, seeing the country hurtling toward an abyss, sent Bismarck, who was in Paris, his famous, desperate telegram. Periculum in mora, dépêchez-vous. There is danger in delay. Hurry. Bismarck arrived in Berlin immediately. He was their last hope, their attack dog to be unleashed on the defiant parliament. But even his staunchest supporters feared him. He was too unpredictable, too radical. King Wilhelm received him at a country palace, but remained doubtful until the last moment. It was one of the most dramatic dialogues in German history. "Do you intend to govern against the will of the parliamentary majority?" the king asked, showing Bismarck the text of his abdication. "I am prepared, Your Majesty," Bismarck replied without hesitation. "But what if they take all our money?" "It is not their money, but Your Majesty's money," Bismarck countered. "But what if it comes to the worst? I could suffer the fate of England's Charles I, who was beheaded." Bismarck looked at his future monarch and declared, "And what could be better than to die for one's king? I myself am ready to perish on the scaffold, but I will not abandon you in this struggle." This fanatical, almost insane devotion and confidence broke the king's hesitation. He tore up the text of his abdication. He said, "On that day, September 23, 1862, Otto von Bismarck was appointed Minister-President of Prussia. He had power, and he immediately showed everyone how he intended to use it." A few days later, speaking before the Parliament's Budget Committee, he delivered a speech that became his political creed and went down in history. The liberal deputies were once again talking about rights, freedoms, and the peaceful unification of Germany through negotiations. Bismarck, with icy contempt, cut them short. "Prussia's position in Germany will not be determined by its liberalism, but by its power," he thundered. "The great questions of the day will not be decided by speeches and majority resolutions. That was the great mistake of 1848 and 1849, but by iron and blood." These words landed like a gunshot. Liberal Europe was horrified. He was called a usurper, a medieval tyrant, a suppressor of freedom. The parliament was enraged. But Bismarck had no intention of backing down. He found a loophole in the constitution. If the parliament and the king could not agree on a budget, the government had the right to rule based on the old one. And so he began to rule. For 4 years he governed the country without an approved budget, against the will of Parliament, on the verge of a coup. He collected taxes, carried out military reform, and built the very army he needed. He knew there was only one way to prove he was right: victory. He needed a war. A small, victorious war that would silence the liberals and show the world the new power of Prussia. And he found a pretext. It came in the form of 2 tiny duchies, Schleswig and Holstein, with predominantly German populations, which were under Danish rule. When the Danish king tried to annex them permanently, a storm of indignation arose in Germany. Bismarck saw his chance. But he was not going to act alone. He pulled off his first brilliant diplomatic trick. Instead of acting as the defender of German national interests, which would have turned all of Europe against him, he proposed that Austria, his main rival, join him. The Austrians, fearing they would lose influence in Germany, could not refuse. In 1864, the Prusso-Austrian army invaded Denmark and defeated it in a matter of weeks. This was the small, victorious war he needed. Prussia gained not only glory, but also an excellent, battle-hardened army. Now it was time to deal with Austria. The joint administration of the captured duchies was the perfect excuse for a quarrel. Bismarck began to deliberately provoke the Austrians, creating endless friction and conflict. He knew war was inevitable, but he needed to prepare the ground carefully. He had to isolate Austria. He met with the French Emperor Napoleon III and, with vague hints of possible territorial concessions, secured his neutrality. He forged a military alliance with the young Kingdom of Italy, promising them Venetia, which was under Austrian rule, in exchange for opening a second front. Most importantly, he was confident of Russia's neutrality, remembering the support Prussia had given it during the Polish uprising. Austria was surrounded. The trap was set. In the summer of 1866, Prussia provoked a conflict and invaded territory controlled by Austria. The Austro-Prussian War, known in Germany as the quote, began. All of Europe was certain of an Austrian victory. Its army was larger, its empire more powerful. But Prussia had 3 decisive advantages. The first was the brilliant strategist, chief of the General Staff, Helmut von Moltke, who was the first in history to use railways for the rapid deployment of troops. The second was the new needle gun, a breech-loading rifle that allowed a Prussian soldier to fire 5 times faster than an Austrian. And the third was Otto von Bismarck. On July 3, 1866, the decisive battle took place near the village of Sadova, or Königgrätz. Bismarck, dressed in a military uniform, was on the battlefield next to the king. At one point, it seemed the Prussians were losing. King Wilhelm was in despair, but Bismarck remained icily calm, offering the king a cigar. At the crucial moment, fresh Prussian corps arrived, brought to the battlefield by Moltke with clockwork precision, and struck the Austrians on the flank. The Austrian army was crushed. The war, predicted to last for years, was over in 7 weeks. The king and his generals, drunk on victory, wanted to march on Vienna, hold a parade, humiliate Austria, and seize its territories. It was here that Bismarck proved himself not as a warrior, but as a great statesman. He vehemently opposed it. He shouted at the king, threatened to resign, and even to commit suicide. He understood what the generals did not. He did not need a humiliated, vengeful Austria. He needed an Austria that would accept its defeat and not interfere with his future plans. He did not need an enemy. He needed a neutral neighbor. With incredible difficulty, he got his way. The peace treaty was signed on surprisingly lenient terms. Austria lost not an inch of its own territory, except for Venetia, which went to Italy. It was simply expelled from Germany forever. Bismarck had cleared the board. Now, on this board, in northern Germany, he created the North German Confederation, in essence, a new federal state under the complete control of Prussia. He returned to Berlin an absolute victor. The liberal parliament, which had hated and cursed him for 4 years, was now at his feet. Bismarck, instead of seeking revenge, made a magnanimous gesture. He asked Parliament for forgiveness for having ruled without a budget. And the Parliament, awed by his victories, not only forgave him, but also retroactively approved all his expenditures. He had defeated more than just Austria. He had also defeated the domestic opposition. He had shown that quote was a more effective tool than liberal speeches. But the work was only half done. The southern German states, Bavaria, Württemberg, still feared Prussia and were unwilling to join the new confederation. For them, Catholic and independent, to throw themselves into the arms of Protestant and authoritarian Berlin, they needed a common mortal enemy. Another war was needed, a war that would unite all Germans against a foreign threat. And Bismarck already knew who that enemy would be. He turned his gaze westward, toward Paris. France had watched Prussia's rapid rise with a poorly concealed anxiety mixed with arrogant disdain. Emperor Napoleon III, the nephew of the great Bonaparte, was a man whose ambitions far exceeded his talents. He had built his second empire on glamour, lavish balls, and nostalgia for his uncle's military glory. But Prussia's victory at Sadowa was a stunning slap in the face. Bismarck had run circles around him. The vague promises of territorial compensation for French neutrality, Belgium or Luxembourg, that he had made before the war with Austria had proven to be empty words. Now, right on France's border, instead of a conglomerate of weak German states, a new, powerful, and aggressive military power had emerged. French society, which considered itself the leading nation of Europe, could not tolerate such a humiliation. Newspapers were filled with caricatures of Prussians, and in the salons and boulevards of Paris, the slogan grew louder. War between France and Prussia was not just possible, it was becoming as inevitable as a thunderstorm on a humid summer day. And Bismarck decided to hasten this inevitability, to orchestrate it and use it for his own purposes. He needed a war with France, but he had to arrange it so that France appeared to be the aggressor. This was the key condition of his brilliant plan. Only then would the southern German states, the Catholic and independent Bavaria, Württemberg, and Baden, bound to Prussia by secret defensive alliances, be obligated to join the war, seeing it as a national cause. Only then would Russia, remembering France's hostile stance during the Crimean War, maintain a benevolent neutrality. Bismarck began to weave his most sophisticated intrigue. He did not rush. He waited for the perfect pretext, and Spain provided it. In 1868, a revolution left the Spanish throne vacant. After a long search, the Provisional Government of Spain offered the crown to Leopold of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen, a distant relative of the Prussian king Wilhelm I. Bismarck secretly supported this candidacy, fully aware of the effect it would have in Paris. For France, it was a nightmare. The prospect of being caught between two Hohenzollerns in a united Germany and in a friendly Spain was unthinkable. Paris erupted in outrage. French diplomats put immense pressure on King Wilhelm. The old king, a peace-loving man who did not want war, personally asked his relative to renounce the Spanish crown. Leopold agreed. It seemed the incident was over. France had won a brilliant diplomatic victory, forcing Prussia to back down. Napoleon III was pleased. But for his ministers, especially Foreign Minister Duc de Gramont, this was not enough. They wanted not just a victory, but a public, resounding humiliation of Prussia. They made the fatal mistake that Bismarck had anticipated and counted on. The French ambassador, Vincent Benedetti, was sent to the spa town of Bad Ems, where King Wilhelm was vacationing, with an unprecedented, audacious demand. The king must provide official written guarantees that a Hohenzollern candidacy would never again be put forward for the Spanish throne. This was a direct insult, an attempt to force the monarch of a great power to make a humiliating promise for all time. The old king, meeting the ambassador on a promenade, politely but firmly refused, stating that he considered the incident completely resolved and saw no subject for further negotiations. The incident was over for a second time. The king considered the matter closed and instructed his aide to send a telegram to Bismarck in Berlin with a detailed description of the events. This telegram, which went down in history as the Ems Dispatch, fell into Bismarck's hands and was transformed from a peaceful document into a declaration of war. Bismarck was dining in Berlin at that moment with General Moltke and Minister of War Roon. All three were in a dejected mood, believing that Prussia had suffered a humiliating diplomatic defeat. Then the dispatch arrived. Bismarck read it, and as he himself later recalled, a flash of lightning went through his mind. He realized that he held in his hands the very pretext he had been waiting for. He asked his guests if the army was ready for war. Receiving an affirmative answer, he took a pencil and, without changing a single word of the king's message, simply by striking out a few lengthy phrases and explanations, he edited the telegram. From a neutral, conciliatory report of a polite refusal, it became a sharp, insulting communiqué. In Bismarck's version, it appeared that after the French ambassador's audacious demand, the Prussian king had rudely shown him the door, refusing to speak with him further. "Now it has a different ring," Bismarck told his guests, whose faces brightened. "Before, it was a signal for retreat. Now it is a fanfare calling for a charge." He immediately gave the order to publish this edited text in all European newspapers. The effect was exactly what he had calculated. As he later cynically remarked, it was a red rag to the Gallic bull. Paris exploded with fury. Crowds on the streets chanted, "To Berlin!" Newspapers demanded revenge for the nation's insult. Napoleon III, a weak and sick man, succumbing to the pressure of his belligerent wife and ministers, declared war on Prussia on July 19, 1870. Bismarck's trap had sprung. In the eyes of the world, France was the aggressor, attacking a peaceful Prussia over a minor diplomatic dispute. The southern German states, outraged by French arrogance, immediately joined Prussia. All Germans, from north to south, united against a common enemy. This was precisely what Bismarck had sought. The war was a catastrophe for France. Its army, considered the best in Europe, proved unprepared. It was poorly organized, poorly equipped, and poorly led. Meanwhile, the German army, mobilized with incredible speed, thanks to Moltke's genius, operated like a well-oiled machine. The Germans invaded France and began to crush French corps one after another. The climax came on September 2, 1870, at the Battle of Sedan. The French army was surrounded and completely routed. Emperor Napoleon III himself, along with 100,000 of his soldiers, disgracefully surrendered. The Second Empire collapsed. Bismarck, once again on the battlefield, watched this triumph with cold satisfaction. But the war was not yet over. A republic was proclaimed in France, and the new government decided to continue the fight. German troops laid siege to Paris. The siege was long and agonizing for the Parisians, but the outcome of the war was already decided. It was at this moment, while cannons still thundered outside Paris, that Bismarck completed his life's work. In the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, the very place that symbolized French greatness and power, he organized the ceremony for the proclamation of the German Empire. It was an act of supreme humiliation for France and the greatest triumph for Germany. On January 18, 1871, under the vaults of Louis XIV's palace, the kings, dukes, and princes of all the German states proclaimed King Wilhelm I of Prussia as the German Emperor, the Kaiser. Otto von Bismarck, standing beside his monarch, watched, and perhaps for the first time in his life, his eyes grew moist. The deed was done. The disunited, weak, and humiliated Germany he had known in his youth ceased to exist. In its place, born in the fire of 3 wars, forged by iron and sealed with blood, a new, powerful German empire was born. And he, from the Prussian countryside, became its first chancellor, its architect, and, in effect, its uncrowned master. Having created the empire, Otto von Bismarck underwent a remarkable transformation, almost unthinkable for a man of his temperament. The hawk, his talons still stained with the blood of 3 wars, retracted them and became a dove, but a dove with steel eyes and an iron beak. The man who had built Germany now began to defend peace in Europe with the same iron will. He declared that the German Empire was, quote, and had no further territorial claims. His turbulent, destructive energy, which he had for decades directed toward unifying the nation, was now replaced by calculated caution, and his aggression by a masterful, multi-layered diplomacy. For the next 20 years, he would not start wars, but prevent them, becoming the chief architect of European security. His new, most difficult task was not conquest, but preservation. He understood better than anyone that the state he had created, young, strong, but vulnerable, was located in the very heart of Europe, surrounded by great powers that viewed its rise with a mixture of fear, envy, and hatred. His primary task was to prevent these powers from uniting against him. He became a great juggler, a political spider, weaving a complex, almost invisible web of alliances, treaties, secret protocols, and verbal agreements to keep Europe in a state of fragile equilibrium, with Germany always at its center. His greatest nightmare, an obsession that haunted him to his final days, was a war on 2 fronts, against a revanchist France in the west and the unpredictable, gigantic Russian Empire in the east. He threw all of his diplomatic genius into preventing this. He knew that France, humiliated by the loss of Alsace-Lorraine and the proclamation of the German Empire at Versailles, was an implacable enemy. Therefore, he did everything to isolate it diplomatically, to leave it alone without allies. He created a fragile, almost unnatural alliance between the conservative monarchies of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia, thereby binding his potential Eastern enemies. When this league began to fray due to their eternal conflicts in the Balkans, where Slavic peoples sought independence, Bismarck convened the Congress of Berlin in 1878. There he acted as an impartial arbitrator who, demanding nothing for Germany, tried to reconcile the great powers and prevent a major war. He maneuvered, intrigued, made secret treaties, and played British interests against Russian and Austrian against Italian. His system of alliances was monstrously complex, full of internal contradictions, and perhaps only he could hold all the strings. But it worked. As long as Bismarck was at the helm, a peace reigned in Europe that historians would later call, but if he was a guardian of peace in foreign policy, he continued to wage his wars at home. His enemies now were not foreign armies, but those he considered Reichsfeinde, forces that undermined the unity and stability of his creation. His first target was the Catholics. In a predominantly Protestant Germany, he saw the Catholic Church, loyal to the Pope, as a foreign, meaning the Alps, power that undermined state authority. He launched a policy known as the Kulturkampf. He passed laws through the Reichstag, parliament, that placed Catholic clergy under strict state control, introduced mandatory civil marriage, closed monasteries, and imprisoned defiant bishops and priests. But he had miscalculated. The persecution only united German Catholics, and their political party, the Center Party, grew stronger. Bismarck, realizing he was losing this war and making a powerful internal enemy, did what only great politicians can do. He admitted his mistake. He gradually wound down the Kulturkampf, and when a new enemy appeared on the horizon, he did not hesitate to form an alliance with his former victims. This new, far more dangerous enemy was the Socialists. The Industrial Revolution had created a powerful and rapidly growing working class in Germany, and the ideas of Karl Marx were becoming increasingly popular. Bismarck, an aristocrat to the core, saw socialism as a mortal threat to his monarchical, conservative, hierarchical world. He called them, after 2 assassination attempts on the Kaiser, which he falsely blamed on the Socialists, he cracked down on them with his full repressive might. He passed through the Reichstag, which banned their organizations, newspapers, and meetings. Leaders were imprisoned or exiled. But here, too, he realized that repression alone was not enough. He applied his famous tactic. He decided to cut the ground from under the Socialists' feet by co-opting their own slogans. He, a staunch conservative, passed the most progressive social legislation in the world. He introduced compulsory insurance for sickness, industrial accidents, and old age and disability pensions. He built a modern welfare state not out of love for the common people, but out of cold calculation, to make the workers loyal to the state and the Kaiser, and to deprive the Socialists of their electoral base. He was at the pinnacle of his power. He was the Chancellor, a prince, a living legend. His word was law. But time moved relentlessly forward. In 1888, which went down in German history as the year of the 3 emperors, his old master and friend, Kaiser Wilhelm I, died. His son, Frederick III, a liberal and an Anglophile whom Bismarck feared and despised, ascended the throne while mortally ill with throat cancer, and reigned for only 99 days. Then his 29-year-old son, the young, ambitious, impulsive, and self-assured Kaiser Wilhelm II, took the throne. And for the first time, the Iron Chancellor faced a force he could not control. A younger generation that no longer wanted to live in his cautious, balanced world. Wilhelm II was the complete opposite of his grandfather. He did not want to be in the shadow of his great chancellor. He considered him outdated, too cautious. He yearned for for colonies, a powerful navy, and world hegemony. He did not understand or appreciate the complex web of alliances Bismarck had woven, viewing it as a sign of cowardice. An inevitable conflict began between the old wise helmsman who knew all the reefs of European politics and the young, hot-headed captain who wanted to sail the ship into the open ocean immediately. Bismarck tried to lecture. Wilhelm resisted. The young Kaiser declared. The end came in March 1890. After another sharp clash over domestic and foreign policy, the Kaiser essentially gave Bismarck an ultimatum: either submit or resign. For Bismarck, who had been the de facto ruler of the country for nearly 30 years, this was unthinkable. On March 18th, he submitted his resignation, expecting that the Kaiser, as his grandfather had done many times before, would get scared and ask him to stay. But Wilhelm was not scared. He accepted the resignation immediately. The age of Bismarck was over. His departure was like the fall of a giant oak. He retired to his estate at Friedrichsruh, becoming but he could not remain silent. He dictated his memoirs, gave interviews, and wrote scathing articles in newspapers, criticizing the Kaiser's new world policy. He watched in horror as his successors, one by one, dismantled his fragile system of alliances, failing to renew the vital reinsurance treaty with Russia and pushing it into the arms of France. He saw his nightmare, a war on two fronts, transform from a hypothetical threat into an inevitability. 20 years from now, this foolishness will cause everything to collapse, he prophesied. He was off by only 6 years. He died on July 30th, 1898, at the age of 83. On his tombstone, by his own wish, a simple and proud inscription was carved: a faithful German servant of Kaiser Wilhelm I. Not Wilhelm II, who had betrayed him, but the old king with whom he had created the empire. He departed this life without seeing the collapse of his life's work, but he foresaw it with painful clarity. He was the last great cabinet statesman of the 19th century, a man who believed that the chaos of history could be controlled by force of will and intellect. And for a time, he succeeded.